They say a father's love is unconditional. They say blood is thicker than water. Well, my story is about the day I found out those are just words people tell themselves to feel better. It's about the day a simple text message from my dad ripped a hole in my heart and exposed a truth so ugly I wish I could unsee it. I'm telling this to you now because I know I'm not the only one. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your own family, like you were just a supporting character in your sibling's movie, hit that like button. If you've ever had a family member take something from you and then act like you owed them a favor, subscribe to this channel right now. Because this is a safe space for us. My name is Ethan. This story is my life. It's a testament that sometimes the only family you can truly count on is the one you build for yourself. The nightmare began on a Tuesday, the kind of day where the sun is out, but the world just feels gray. I was sitting at my desk, trying to wrap up a report, when my phone buzzed with a notification. A text from my dad. "Ethan, I'm so disappointed in you." That was it. No hello. No context. Just a stab in the dark. My fingers froze over the keyboard. A chill ran through me, as if a ghost had just walked over my grave. I stared at the message, rereading it, my mind racing. Disappointed in me I hadn't talked to him in a week. Just as I was about to type a frantic reply, another message came in. This one from my mom. It was a screenshot of my brother, Leo, on a boat, laughing, a ridiculous diamond watch gleaming on his wrist. Underneath the photo, a caption read, "Living large. It's what you deserve. Fam." The message from my mom was short. "Leo says you've done nothing for this family. He's right. You'll never be as good as your brother." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air rushed from my lungs. I felt a familiar, aching burn in my chest. That same old feeling. A wound that never healed. Just festering under the surface. It was always about Leo. Since we were kids, he was the golden child, the star quarterback, the life of the party. I was just the quiet, tech-obsessed kid who spent his weekends tinkering with computers. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, but I didn't. Instead, I opened my banking app. It was almost a reflex at this point. I found the transaction history, scrolled back 2 months, and hit the resend button. My screen lit up with a confirmation message. My hands trembled as I took a screenshot and replied to my dad. It was a short message, not an apology, but an act of defiance. A quiet explosion of all the years of pain and neglect. "You're disappointed in me. Dad, let me tell you who I'm disappointed in. I'm disappointed in people who can look you in the eye and lie. People who make promises they don't keep. People who take and take and take until there's nothing left." I typed furiously, my thumb hitting the send button with a final, desperate force. "I don't know what you've been told, but I've been taking care of this family for years. And right now, I just sent another $25,000 to your account. I hope this covers the rest of those medical bills you're so worried about." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I knew what I had just done. I had finally, after a lifetime of silence, called them out. I had exposed a deep, dark secret that they had all agreed to keep. I knew my life would never be the same. The silence that followed was deafening. My phone didn't buzz. No text came back. But I knew, deep down, that the quiet was just the calm before the storm. I knew my parents said, "You'll never be as good as your brother," but they had no idea what that statement would cost them. The most painful part of it all was that I was doing it all for them. And they had no idea. The parents said, "You'll never be as good as your brother." I'd heard it a million times, but this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. This time, I was going to find out what happened to that money. And that was just the beginning of the betrayal. It's funny how a single text can make you feel like you're 12 years old again. As I stared at my phone, the anger and confusion from my dad's message started to fade. replaced by a dull ache. It was a feeling I knew all too well, a scar that ran deeper than any I could see. My parents saying, "You'll never be as good as your brother," wasn't just a random, cruel remark. It was the theme song of my childhood, the soundtrack to every family gathering, every report card, every birthday. My earliest memories are just fuzzy, but the ones with Leo are crystal clear. He was 4 years younger than me, but he was always the one they talked about. When I was in elementary school, my dad, a hard-working, quiet guy who spent his days as a lineman for the power company, rarely had much to say. But when Leo was born, it was like a switch flipped. Every word out of his mouth was about his little star. Leo was charming, an effortless talker. He could make a room full of grumpy relatives burst into laughter with a single joke. And me, I was the quiet one, the one who preferred building Lego spaceships in my room to playing baseball in the yard. My parents would look at my meticulously organized Lego creations and sigh, "He's in his own world," my mom would say to my dad, not unkindly, but as if it were a defect that needed fixing. My parents didn't set out to hurt me. I think they just didn't see me. I was the prologue to the main event. Leo was the story they wanted to tell everyone. I remember one time, I built a small, working light-up sign for a school science fair. It was this little LED circuit board, and I was so proud of it. I brought it home, my heart in my throat, hoping for a single word of praise. I showed it to my mom. She glanced at it, smiled a tired smile, and said, "That's nice, honey. Now go play outside with your brother. He needs a partner for his soccer game." My masterpiece, my hours of tinkering, were dismissed in a single sentence. That moment was a pebble dropping into a silent pool, creating ripples that would follow me for years. It was the first time I understood that my passions, my efforts, were invisible to them. I never resented Leo. He was my little brother, and I loved him. He was just doing what he knew how to do, be the golden child. He was born into a role, a spotlight he never asked for, and he learned to perform. But I was stuck in the shadows he cast. I was the good student, the one who never caused trouble. My report cards were always solid, B's and A's, but they never earned the same excitement as Leo's trophies from his school plays or his soccer team. My dad would look at my report card, nod, and say, "Good. Now look at what your brother got. That's what effort looks like." The words were like a silent poison, slowly eating away at my self-worth. It continued all through high school. I joined the robotics club, spending hours in the computer lab learning to code. The lines of code felt like a secret language, one that didn't judge me or compare me to anyone. It was a world of logic, a place where I was in control. Meanwhile, Leo was the star quarterback, the homecoming king. Everyone loved him. At parent-teacher conferences, my teachers would say, "Ethan is a fine student, very quiet, very smart. He just needs to come out of his shell more." My mom would nod, beaming, as if she were in on a secret. As for Leo, the teachers would talk about his charisma, his leadership, his bright future. This constant comparison became a weight I carried with me everywhere. It wasn't a loud, angry kind of hurt. It was a quiet ache. It made me retreat further into myself, building a wall around my heart. I wanted my parents to see me, just me, Ethan, not as a shadow, but as a person with my own worth, my own dreams. It felt like I was begging for a love they had already given away. I knew my parents said, "You'll never be as good as your brother," but I always hoped that one day they would change their minds. I didn't know it then, but this deep-seated feeling of being overlooked would become the very fuel for a sacrifice that would ultimately lead to a betrayal so profound. It would change my family forever. I was trying so hard to prove them wrong, and they didn't even notice. Interactive poll. Have you ever felt like you were the less favorite in your family? Comment yes or no below. After graduation, I felt like I was finally free. My acceptance letter to the engineering program at Virginia Tech wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my ticket out. It was a chance to prove my worth. Not to my parents, but to myself. I remember standing at the university gates, looking at the huge brick buildings and telling myself, this is where I belong. I was a little scared, but mostly I was just relieved. I felt like I was finally stepping out of Leo's shadow for good. My college years weren't glamorous. I wasn't the fraternity type, and I didn't go to wild parties. I was in my element in the labs where circuits and lines of code made sense, where there was no room for emotional bias or favoritism. I worked a part-time job at the campus library, and another one fixing computers for students. My dream was simple: to become a software engineer, to build a stable life for myself. A life where my worth was measured by my skills, not by how charming I was. Meanwhile, Leo took a different path. He bounced around for a couple of years, trying to find himself. He dabbled in crypto, then a few failed apps, always talking about a big deal he was about to close. He was still the golden child, but now he was the visionary, the go-getter. My parents, especially my dad, admired his risk-taking. That's what it takes to succeed. He'd say, "You, Ethan, you're just working a regular job. What's that going to get you?" It was a constant, low-level hum of disappointment. Every phone call from home was filled with updates on Leo's latest venture. He'd call and tell them about a new investment, a fancy dinner with a potential business partner, or how he was about to make it big. He'd always say he needed a little money to get started, to seize the opportunity. And my parents, without a second thought, would dip into their retirement savings. My mom even took out a small loan once. "Chase needs this chance to rise," she'd tell me, her voice full of a blind faith I'd never felt from her. I never asked them for a dime. I was too proud, and honestly, too scared of their answer. I lived frugally, eating instant noodles and saving every penny. I remember one time, I needed a specific, expensive textbook for an advanced class. I hesitantly called my mom, rehearsing the words in my head. When I finally asked, her sigh was so loud I could hear it through the phone. "Things are tight. Ethan, we just sent money to Leo for his business," she said. "You'll have to manage." The conversation ended there, and I didn't push it. I went to a second-hand bookstore, found an old copy, and made do. It was a harsh reminder that I was on my own. After college, I landed a job at a tech company in Austin, Texas. It was a dream come true. I was finally building my own life, on my own terms. My income was decent, but I was still careful with money. I rented a small apartment and focused on paying off my student loans. I wasn't interested in the latest cars or expensive clothes. For me, stability was the most precious thing in the world. I still called my parents every week, hoping to hear some change in their tone, but they were still preoccupied with Leo's projects. Then, my parents' health issues started. My dad, after years of being a lineman, had to retire early due to lung problems. My mom cut back her hours at the local bank. The bills started piling up, and they were stressed. Hearing my mom's worried voice over the phone, talking about medication costs and rising utility bills, broke my heart. I knew I had to do something. My parents weren't great with banking apps or digital transfers. My mom always said it was too complicated. I called Leo, who was still living at home, and came up with what I thought was a simple solution. I would transfer money to his account, and he would give it to our parents in cash. He agreed immediately, his voice full of an enthusiasm that, looking back, should have been a red flag. "Don't worry, big bro," he said. "I'll take care of it." I trusted him. He was my brother, after all. Every month, I diligently sent $2,500 with a little note in the transaction description for Mom and Dad. I never asked if they received it. I just assumed they did. I just wanted to help them. Quietly. Without any fanfare. I told myself that even if they never knew, at least I was doing the right thing. Little did I know. This simple act of trust would become a tragic comedy of errors. A story that would prove my parents said you'll never be as good as your brother. Because their vision was always clouded by a lie I never knew was being told. The truth, festering in the dark, was about to come to light in a spectacular, painful way. That feeling of being on my own, it became a part of who I was. I got used to it. The quiet sacrifices, the late nights, the constant grind, it all felt normal. I kept sending money every month. A silent promise. A secret act of love I hoped they felt even if they didn't know where it came from. I figured I'd keep this going as long as I could, just wanting them to be okay. And for a while, they seemed to be. My mom would mention in passing that Leo's business is doing so well he's helping us out with a little cash. I just nod and let it slide. It hurt, of course. But what was the point in saying anything? They were happy, and that was all that mattered to me. I was just glad to know they were okay. I never imagined it was all just a setup for the biggest slap in the face I'd ever get. The turning point, the day everything came crashing down, was my mom's 60th birthday party. It was the first time I'd flown home in almost a year. I was genuinely excited. I'd found this incredible job in Austin. My life was finally stable, and I was going to see my family. It felt like I was bringing a piece of my new successful life back with me to share. When I walked through the door, the house was packed with aunts, uncles, and cousins. The first person to hug me was my mom, but her eyes were already scanning the room, looking for Leo. My dad gave me a quick pat on the back, and then he was gone, heading for the kitchen to talk to my brother. Leo, of course, was in his element. He was dressed in a new suit, a shiny new watch on his wrist, and he had everyone's attention. He was telling a story about a big deal he just closed, and everyone was hanging on his every word. My mom was beaming, her eyes filled with a pride that I'd always craved but never earned. I tried to join in, to tell them about my work, about the new projects I was leading at my company. But every time I opened my mouth, the conversation would somehow circle back to Leo. "Oh, that's nice, Ethan," my aunt said. "But what do you think about Leo buying a new house? Isn't that something my uncle chimed in? That boy's a natural. Not everyone's cut out for the big leagues. I guess." The words were like daggers, and they just kept coming. I felt invisible, even more so than when I was a kid. I was a man with a stable job, a man who was quietly supporting his parents, and all they could see was the ghost of a boy who could never measure up. My dad, in a rare moment of direct conversation with me, put his hand on my shoulder. "You'll never be as good as your brother, son," he said, his voice quiet, almost kind, as if he were stating a fact of nature. "He takes care of this family." Those words, so familiar, so worn out, felt different this time. They didn't sting as much as they used to. Now they just felt final. It was the moment I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how much I sacrificed, I would never be enough. It was a realization so powerful it felt like an earthquake inside me. My throat tightened, and my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I looked at my brother, laughing and holding court, and then I looked at my parents, their eyes full of admiration for him. I thought about all the hours I worked to send them money, about the late nights and the skipped meals. I thought about the phone calls where they'd complain about their finances, all while I was silently trying to fix it. And it was in that moment, in the middle of a crowded room, that I made a decision that would change everything. The truth, festering in the dark, was about to come to light in a spectacular, painful way. And I was going to be the one to light the match. It was time for a reckoning, The betrayal had gone on for far too long. They say a man's home is his castle. Mine was my fortress. It was a place where my worth was measured in lines of code, not in accolades from family. My life in Austin was about as far from my childhood in the Rust Belt as you could get. It was a world of possibility, a place where no one knew my brother's name or compared me to him. My days were a rhythm of espresso, debugging code, and the quiet satisfaction of building something from nothing. It was a life I had built piece by piece, all on my own. But that fortress was about to fall. The silent, emotional earthquake I felt at my mom's party was just a tremor before the real storm. I left the party early, a bitter taste in my mouth, and flew back to Austin. The whole way back, my phone was a silent brick in my pocket. No calls from my parents, no frantic texts from Leo. It was as if I had never said a word. The silence was louder than any argument could ever be. It was their way of saying, "We don't care what you think. Nothing has changed." A few days later, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. It was a notice that a large transaction had been rejected. I hadn't initiated a transfer. Confused, I clicked on the app. The message read, "Pending transfer of $25,000 to Leo Grant rejected due to insufficient funds." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. I had no idea what this was. I wasn't sending that much. The only time I ever sent money to Leo was the $2,500 every month. My mind was reeling. I called the bank immediately, and after a tense 10 minutes on hold, I got a hold of a representative. She was patient and polite, but the words she said felt like a physical assault. "Sir, this transaction was initiated from your account, but it's a loan request. Your brother, Leo Grant, has been attempting to secure a loan for $25,000, naming you as the cosigner. He listed you as the successful family member who will cover the debt." I felt the world tilt on its axis. My ears were ringing. "A loan," I stammered. "He did that. In my name." The representative's voice was calm, but the words were a tidal wave, drowning me in a sea of betrayal. She explained that Leo had been using my personal information, my name, my address, my job to try and secure multiple loans over the past year. He'd used the last $2,500 I sent him not to help our parents, but to pay off an overdue bill on one of these fraudulent loans. Just enough to keep the scheme afloat. The last loan request had been for an enormous sum, likely to cover mounting debts, and the bank, sensing something was wrong, had red flagged it. I hung up the phone, my body shaking with a rage I had never felt before. It wasn't just the money, it was the lies, the sheer audacity of it all. He wasn't just my parents' golden child, he was a fraud, a thief, and a liar who was using my hard-earned success as a ladder to a life of fake luxury. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and my phone and headed straight for the car. I didn't know where I was going, but my legs were moving on their own. I drove until I was on the highway, the city lights of Austin blurring into streaks of white and red. The words of the bank representative echoed in my head. He didn't just take my money. He took my identity. He used my quiet sacrifice to fund his fake life, to keep his golden boy image intact, all while I was being shamed for not being as good as him. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was my mom. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and answered, "Ethan, we need you to call the bank. There's been a mix-up with the money you sent." Her voice was tight, anxious, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of her hurtful words. I didn't even try to explain. I just said, "I know. I'm on my way." I hung up and turned the car around. My gut was telling me that my silence, my years of keeping the peace, had finally led to this. I was on my way to my family's house, and I was going to find out what happened. I didn't know it then, but what I was about to find out was far worse than anything I could ever have imagined. The fraud, the lies, the betrayal, it was all about to come to a head in a way that would change my life forever. When I arrived at my parents' house, The air was thick with tension. The front door was ajar, and I could hear my parents and Leo arguing inside. I walked in, and my mom looked up at me, her eyes wide with relief, as if I was the solution to all her problems. But it wasn't my dad or my mom who spoke first. It was Leo. "Ethan, man, I'm so glad you're here. We have a problem. The bank is saying that I forged your name on a loan. It's a misunderstanding, I swear. I can explain." His voice was a practiced performance, full of charm and feigned innocence. But I'd seen the bank statements. I knew the truth. I just stared at him, my face a mask of stone. My dad, who was standing a few feet away, looked at me, his eyes full of a fear I had never seen before. My mom started to cry. "Ethan, your father is sick. We can't handle this." I looked at her, and then at my father. His face was pale, his hands shaking. He looked a decade older than he was. I knew this was hard on them, but I couldn't let it go. Not this time. My silence had almost cost me my financial freedom, my future. This was about more than just money. This was about justice. "I know what happened," I said, my voice quiet, but firm. "I know about the loan. I know about the money you've been taking. I know about all the lies you've been telling." My voice was a hammer, each word a nail, hammering the truth into the wall of lies my family had built. I looked at Leo, his face pale with shock. The mask had fallen. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was just a coward, a fraudster, a thief. "You used my name to steal from me. You used my generosity to fund your fake life. You used my love to make a fool out of me." My words were not a question. They were an accusation. My mom began to sob uncontrollably. "Alvin!" she cried, using my name for the first time in what felt like forever. "We had no idea. We thought he was helping us. We thought he was just being a good son." She looked at me, her eyes full of a mixture of pain and shame. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." My dad just stood there, his eyes fixed on me. "Ethan," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I should have listened to you. I should have believed in you." His words, so long in coming, were a balm on an open wound. They didn't fix anything, but they were a start. My parents had no idea what to do. They were shell-shocked. Their world, built on the image of their golden son, was crumbling before their very eyes. They looked at me, their faces etched with a fear and a vulnerability I'd never seen before. They were looking at me, not as a disappointment, but as a lifeline. The conversation that followed was the hardest one of my life. I had to make them see the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I had to make them see what they had done, what they had allowed to happen, and what they needed to do to fix it. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about healing. And it was going to be a long, painful process. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I was ready. I was ready to face the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I was ready to fight for my family, for my future, and for my own worth. And I knew that this was the beginning of the rest of my life. After that day, the silence wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a choice. I drove back to Austin and didn't hear from my family for 2 weeks. It felt surreal. For my entire life, I'd been the one to reach out, to keep the peace, to try to mend the cracks. But after the confrontation, I just stopped. It was like I had finally cut a rope that had been holding me in a place I no longer belonged. The first person to break the silence was my mom. She called me, her voice shaky and full of a regret I'd never heard before. She didn't try to make excuses. She just said, "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. I'm just so sorry." For the first time, she was talking to me like a son she had hurt, not just a disappointment. I could hear the pain in her voice, and it was the first time I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The next call was from my dad. His voice was raspy, his words slow and deliberate. "Son," he said, "I was wrong. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about a lot of things. I'm sorry." The apology was simple, but it was everything. All those years, all those words, all that pain, it was all washed away by those 3 simple words. I didn't have to prove my worth anymore. My dad saw me. He finally saw me. But the hardest conversation was with Leo. He called me late one night, his voice choked with shame and desperation. "Ethan, I'm so screwed. I'm in deep with loan sharks. They're threatening me." He confessed everything. The lavish lifestyle, the fancy dinners, the new watch, it was all a facade. A lie he had been living to keep up appearances. He was trapped in a web of his own making, and he was terrified. He said he had no idea what to do, and for the first time, he wasn't looking for a handout. He was looking for help. He was looking for a way out. I felt a mix of anger and pity. He was my brother, and even after all he had done, I couldn't just leave him to drown. I couldn't just turn my back on him. But I knew I couldn't help him the way he wanted. The old me, the one who would sacrifice everything for his family, was gone. The new me, the one who had learned the hard way about boundaries and self-worth, had to do things differently. I told him I wouldn't give him any more money, but I would help him get out of the mess he had created. I told him he needed to find a job, to get a loan from a legitimate bank, to start taking responsibility for his own life. I told him I would help him find a way to get out of the debt, but he had to do the work. He listened. For the first time, he really listened. He knew I was serious. He knew this wasn't an option. It was a demand. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just his brother. I was his lifeline. After that call, things slowly started to change. I started talking to my parents again, and for the first time, they were genuinely interested in my life. They asked about my job, about my projects, about my life in Austin. It wasn't about Leo anymore. It was about me. I would send them money every month. But this time, it was different. I sent it directly to their bank account, and I would call and ask them to confirm they had received it. There was no more secret, no more lies. It was all out in the open, and it was the most honest our relationship had ever been. This was the first step toward healing. It wasn't easy. There was still a lot of pain and a lot of mistrust, but we were talking. We were trying. We were trying to build something new, something honest, out of the ashes of our old, broken family. I knew it would be a long, hard road, but I was ready for it. I was ready to face the truth, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just an afterthought. I was a son. I was a brother. I was a man, and I was finally free. For weeks after that confrontation, I felt like I was in a strange kind of limbo. I was no longer the silent son, the afterthought. I was the one who had spoken up, who had exposed the truth. But what now? The raw, emotional shock had worn off, and what was left was a quiet, almost peaceful emptiness. The anger had faded, and in its place was a sense of calm. I had done what I needed to do. I had faced the truth, and I was still standing. The first real step toward healing was a small one. A phone call with my mom. She told me she had set up a new bank account, a joint one with my dad, just as I had asked. She said she was trying to learn how to use the banking app. But it was too complicated. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in a long time. I spent the next half hour on the phone, walking her through it step by step. I didn't get angry when she struggled. I was just patient. It felt good to be teaching her something, to be connecting with her in a way we never had before. A few days later, my dad called. He told me he was finally going to get the surgery he needed for his lungs. He said he had been putting it off because he was afraid they couldn't afford it. "Your brother told me it was too expensive," he said, his voice quiet. My heart ached. I knew what that meant. I knew how much money Leo had taken, how many lies he had told. I told my dad not to worry about it, that the money was there. He just sighed with relief, a sound that was more eloquent than any apology he could have given. But the real turning point was a few weeks later, when I got a call from Leo. He sounded different. His voice was no longer slick or charming. It was just tired. He told me he had gotten a job at a local auto shop, an entry-level position that paid a modest salary. He said he was saving every penny to pay off his debts. "I'm not living large anymore. Man," he said, "I'm just trying to live right." He told me he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he sounded genuine. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was just being honest. I could feel the shift in our relationship, a subtle but profound change. The constant competition, the silent animosity, it was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet respect. We weren't best friends, but we were brothers, and we were finally talking. We were finally being honest with each other. It was a new beginning for both of us. In the months that followed, I saw my family begin to heal. My parents would call me to tell me about their day, about my mom's new favorite flower, about my dad's progress after his surgery. They stopped talking about Leo's projects and started talking about his hard work. They were finally seeing the difference between a facade and the truth, between an illusion and reality. I also saw the shift in myself. I was no longer the quiet, angry son. I was the one who had found his voice. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to my family's approval, but to my own self-respect. I was no longer living in Leo's shadow. I was just Ethan, a man who had built a life for himself, a man who had faced his demons and won. My life in Austin thrived. I was promoted to project team leader, a position that I had worked my entire life for. My colleagues looked up to me, and my work was a testament to my skill and dedication. I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of. And then, one day, I met her. Her name was Maya. She was a journalist, a woman with a quick wit and a kind heart. We talked for hours about our families, our dreams, our pasts. I told her everything about Leo, about my parents, about the betrayal. She just listened, her eyes filled with a compassion I had never seen before. She didn't judge me. She just understood. She became my rock, my confidant, my best friend. She taught me to let go of the pain, to forgive, and to love. She showed me that my worth was not determined by my family's approval, but by my own strength and resilience. She was the family I had built for myself, and she was more than I could have ever hoped for. A year later, we were married. It was a small, intimate ceremony with just our closest friends and family. My parents were there, and for the first time, I felt their love without any conditions. They looked at me with a pride that was genuine and true. My dad, who had always been a man of few words, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, I'm so proud of you. You're everything a father could ever want." My mom, tears in her eyes, hugged me tightly and said, "You found your peace, honey, and I'm so happy for you." Leo was there too. He was dressed in a simple suit, no flashy watch, no expensive shoes. He looked at me, his eyes full of a remorse that was real and true. He hugged me and said, "I'm sorry. Ethan, for everything. I'm a better man now because of you. I hugged him back. I knew he was telling the truth. We weren't perfect, but we were on the path to healing. As I stood there with my new wife, my new family, my new life, I realized that I had finally found my home. It wasn't a place. It was a feeling of peace, of love, of belonging. I had faced the darkness, and I had come out on the other side. I know what it's like to feel like the black sheep. I know what it's like to be an afterthought. I know what it's like to have your family turn their backs on you. But I also know what it's like to find your voice, to stand up for yourself, to fight for your own worth. And I know what it's like to find your own version of happiness, a happiness that no one can take away from you. This is my story. It's a story about a family that was broken and a man who was lost. But it's also a story about a man who found his way, a man who found his voice, and a man who found his own version of family. If you've ever felt alone, if you've ever felt like you didn't belong, if you've ever felt like you were just a supporting character in someone else's story, this channel is for you. We're all in this together. And together, we can all find our way. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. It tells me that my story is helping others, and it keeps this channel going. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, if you want to join a community of people who are fighting for their own worth, subscribe to this channel right now. It's more than a button. It's a promise that you'll never have to feel alone again.